Alright, folks, tonight we're kicking things off with the legendary discipline and unrelenting misery of the Roman legion, that elite war machine that conquered half the known world while gifting humanity with sandals, unervingly straight roads, and the refined art of screaming Latin obscenities while stabbing people in the gut. So before you get too comfortable in your modern existence, take a hot second to smash that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely dig what I'm serving up here. Drop a comment about where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always wild seeing our global crew tuning in from every corner of the planet. Now, dim those lights, maybe crack a window for some ambient noise, and let's settle in for tonight's journey together. So you think you'd cut it in the Roman Legion? Adorable. Like watching a kitten attempt to file its taxes. Before you could even dream of getting impaled in glorious battle, you had to survive recruitment. Rome's version of a talent show where the only talent that mattered was, can this dude haul a small donkey uphill while bleeding from multiple orifices? Step 1. Present yourself to the recruiter. Shirt off, chest puffed out, dreams higher than the Alps. The recruiter, a man who'd seen more bare chests than a bathhouse attendant, wasn't impressed. He'd check your teeth, not to compliment your smile, but to confirm you could gnaw through military-grade bread without dying. Flat feet, rejected. Arms like cooked spaghetti, rejected. Looking like you'd piss yourself at the first battle cry, cute but rejected. Height mattered. Stamina mattered. Having a face that didn't silently scream, "Please don't hurt me," was a huge plus. If you miraculously passed inspection, congratulations. You were now considered fit for service, which in Roman terms meant unlikely to immediately perish in amusing fashion. Then came the oath, not to Rome itself, but to your commanding officer, a man whose facial muscles had forgotten how to smile since his last crucifixion party. This oath was serious business. Break it, and you weren't getting grounded. You'd be flogged, stabbed, or decimated, which sounds metal, but actually meant your own squad would beat you to death for team morale. Still with me? Great. Now sign your life away, trade your youth for a scratchy tunic, and prepare for the next 25 years of back-breaking labor, endless trench digging, and being screamed at by men with aggressively oiled mustaches. They called this an honor. Roman citizens lined up for it. Some were even excited about it. Adventure, they said. Glory, they claimed. Most didn't survive their first serious sandal blister. And don't think being a citizen made it easier. If you were the unfortunate combination of poor and Roman, congratulations. The Legion was now your life, your career counselor, and your therapist rolled into one. Of course, if you weren't Roman, you could still join up. They'd just call you an auxiliary, pay you less, and use you as frontline cannon fodder. And that's just the application process. Made it through? You're in. Hooray. Now begins the systematic erasure of your entire identity. Forget your name. You're no longer Gaius or Lucius or that guy with surprisingly good abs. You're now simply Miles, Latin for soldier, or more accurately, walking shovel with anxiety issues. Your new identity came wrapped in leather straps, brass fittings, and the distinctive aroma of whatever had died in your boots last week. Your haircut? The standard issue bowl cut of shame. Your clothes? The military's idea of one size fits none. Everyone dressed identical, marched identical, bled identical. Want to express yourself? Try blinking in Morse code during inspection. The Legion didn't do individuality, it did uniformity. Your new best friends? 50 sweaty men in identical tunics, all equally miserable and interchangeable. Smile too much, and the Centurion might think you're plotting something, or worse, enjoying yourself. You'd sleep in a tent with 7 other soldiers, stacked together like overcooked lasagna noodles. One snore, collective suffering. One fart, group existential crisis. And your gear wasn't optional. The gladius, a stabbing implement masquerading as a sword, the scutum, a door-sized shield, and the pilum, a spear designed to bend on impact so enemies couldn't throw it back, weren't suggestions. You carried them everywhere along with your cooking pot, pickaxe, spare sandals, and whatever scraps of enthusiasm remained. Free time? You mean those 2 precious hours between digging a latrine and standing guard in the rain? Sure, use them wisely. Maybe polish your armor. Maybe cry quietly into your vinegar water. Discipline wasn't just enforced, it was practically a religion. One man screws up, whole unit pays. This created what Romans called cohesion and what modern therapists call shared trauma. Want to speak your mind? Adorable. Keep those thoughts to yourself unless you enjoy running laps in full armor while your centurion screams Latin insults about your mother's questionable life choices. You weren't a man anymore. You were a cog in Rome's war machine. A machine that didn't tolerate rust, hesitation, or personality. Especially personality. By the time they finished molding you, even your own mother wouldn't recognize you, though she'd probably still complain about your tunic smelling like dead feet. Ah yes, the centurion, your commanding officer, life coach, disciplinary specialist, and part-time thundercloud. If you thought military life would be tough, just wait until you meet the human embodiment of gravel, scars, and vocal fury. This wasn't just your superior. He was your personal spiritual crisis in human form. Typically in his 30s or 40s, which in Roman years meant he was basically immortal, bearing the scars of every battle he'd ever screamed through, probably wearing someone's ear as a necklace. His armor shone brighter than your future. His temper? On a hair trigger, especially if someone sneezed during formation. A centurion didn't train you. He broke you down and rebuilt you into a slightly more obedient version of yourself. You'd hear his voice more than your own thoughts. His favorite hobby? Screaming your full name followed by impossible demands like dig faster, march harder, or stop dying. He carried a vine staff called the vitus, which sounds poetic until you realize its sole purpose was beating sense into people, which he wielded with the enthusiasm of someone working through childhood trauma. Question his orders? Enjoy cleaning latrines with your toothbrush, if toothbrushes existed. Disobey? Public flogging. Slack off. Your rations would mysteriously vanish. Crack a joke? He'd make you dig a hole, bury your sense of humor in it, then fill it back in. But credit where it's due. Centurions were terrifyingly competent. They led from the front in battle, first into danger, last to retreat. If you were bleeding out in the mud, your centurion would either drag you to safety or scream at you until you stood up out of sheer spite. To him, discipline was sacred, weakness was contagious, and comfort was for barbarians and poets. You didn't love your centurion. You feared him, respected him, and definitely had stressed dreams about his sandals stomping toward you. In short, he was your boss, your nightmare, and your only hope of surviving long enough to get screamed at again tomorrow. So you survived the yelling, the swearing in, and the soul-crushing indoctrination. Welcome to camp life. The Roman legion's idea of a five-star resort. Assuming your idea of luxury involves dirt, body odor, and someone snoring directly into your ear canal. First lesson, free time doesn't exist. If you're not marching or fighting, you're digging. And if you're not digging, congratulations, you're building something that will need to be dug up later. Trenches, ramparts, walls, ditches. The Romans were obsessed with earthworks, possibly because they knew future archaeologists would need something to talk about besides toga parties. Your day began at dawn, rudely awakened by a horn that sounded like optimism dying. Then you dress, tunic, sandals, armor, the holy trinity of discomfort, and report for duty. No clocking in. You just showed up and prayed not to get stabbed with the vitus. Then came drills, endless drills. Marching, turning, stabbing straw dummies with all the enthusiasm of someone doing taxes with a knife. Every movement had to be perfect because sloppy formations got people killed, or worse, noticed by the centurion. After that, construction. The camp needed fortifying every single night. Yes, even if you were just stopping for a quick snack. You and your fellow trench-digging gremlins would grab shovels and dig like your lives depended on it, because they did. Meals. Imagine barley porridge that tasted like regret, cheese that actively fought your digestive system, and sour wine watered down because hydration was a luxury and taste buds were overrated. Bathrooms. Communal trenches with sponges on sticks. Let's leave that there. Evenings were spent maintaining gear, cleaning weapons, mending sandals, and trying not to cry where anyone could see you. If you were lucky, maybe a quick dice game with the boys before collapsing onto a straw mattress that suspiciously smelled like the last guy who slept on it. Privacy? Non-existent. Comfort? A myth. Blisters? Oh buddy, blisters were practically a form of currency. If you imagine Roman legion life as heroic battles and rousing speeches, surprise, it was mostly marching. So much marching that by retirement, your feet would develop their own opinions, none of them polite. A legionary covered 20 to 30 kilometers daily in full kit, which for the record weighed about 90 pounds. Give or take your will to live. This included armor, shield, sword, 2 spears, cloak, cookware, rations, tent poles, and whatever emotional baggage you carried from childhood. They called this the mule load, except you were the mule. The pace wasn't some scenic stroll. It was brutal, rhythmic, and designed to weed out anyone whose knees dared to exist. Every mile, some poor soul would trip, fall behind, or suddenly remember they forgot to be born rich. Breaks existed technically, just long enough to chug water, shovel down barley mush, and question your life choices. Then back to stomping down those famously straight Roman roads, because apparently curves were for cowards and philosophers. And yes, after marching all day, you got to build a fortified camp. That's right. Hike 30 kilometers, then immediately start playing military-themed home improvement. No prizes, just your centurion judging your hammer skills with silent disappointment. Blisters? Standard issue. Lost toenails. A rite of passage. Comrades sleepwalking while marching? Surprisingly common. Trip? Get yelled at. Complain? Get mocked. Fake an injury? The medic would slap you with a wet sponge and send you back out. But Romans didn't complain, not from stoicism, but because breathing took all their energy. The legion didn't do whiners, it did walking shovels with commitment issues. If you joined hoping for glory, know you'd mostly be walking toward where glory might be happening, praying it hadn't packed up and left. Congratulations, after marching until your legs forgot they were legs, you earned combat training. This is where your heroic fantasies went to die, preferably in controlled conditions supervised by a man whose face forgot how to smile. First lesson, your gladius, that stubby sword you imagined waving dramatically, wasn't for slashing. No, you stabbed with it. Right into squishy zones, groin, prime real estate, armpits, lovely, neck, chef's kiss. Why? Stabbing required less effort, killed quicker, and didn't get your sword stuck in ribs like some amateur. Romans were practical like that, cold, efficient, and deeply unimpressed by flair. You practiced on wooden dummies called pels, basically logs dressed as barbarians, stabbing them until your shoulders screamed and palms bled while your centurion critiqued your wrist technique like a disappointed ballet instructor. Then came shield drills. The scutum was basically a portable wall, and you learned to use it as such. Blocking, bashing, forming shield walls. All fun until someone took a corner to the nose and napped in the mud. Sparring matches? Oh yes, fighting fellow recruits with wooden swords, channeling all that pent-up rage from communal sponge usage. Injuries were expected, teeth were optional, and if you got knocked down, your reward was a lecture about how real enemies won't wait for you to stand up, while everyone called you princess. You also trained with the pilum, that clever throwing spear designed to bend on impact so enemies couldn't throw it back. One job, stab once, then retire just like you wished you could. All this while wearing full gear in blistering heat with minimal water and maximum yelling. Daily training because someday you'd be shipped to Gaul or Dacia where locals expressed hospitality via axe wounds. After all the marching, log stabbing, and being roasted by your centurion's eyebrows, battle day finally arrived. Your nerves were shot, legs were jelly, and undergarments. Let's not discuss those. The enemy stood across the field, maybe wild-haired Gauls screaming like they stepped on Legos, or Parthians with curved swords and a personal vendetta against helmets. Either way, they looked terrifying, smelled like wet goats, and hated you specifically. Your centurion's whistle blew. You fell into formation, or tried to, held your shield like your life depended on it, because it did, and advanced while mentally updating your will. The formation? The testudo, or tortoise, shields on all sides and overhead, turning you into a giant sweating metal sandwich. Arrows rained down, thudding against shields, accompanied by the occasional scream of someone who moved too slow. Then, contact. Screaming, clashing, beautiful chaos. Your training kicked in, sort of. You jabbed with the gladius, hunting soft spots between armor while trying not to get stabbed in the face. The guy next to you went down. No time to mourn or blink or breathe. The air thickened with dust, blood, and the dawning realization that this looked nothing like the training dummy. The enemy yelled things you didn't understand, but whose meaning was clear. They weren't here to negotiate. Your centurion charged past, bashing skulls like he was stirring soup, screaming, "Hold formation," which was rich considering you were currently trying not to die. After what felt like a lifetime, the horn blew. Retreat or advance, you didn't care. You were alive, more than you expected 15 minutes ago. As you stumbled back into ranks, bloody and traumatized, you realized one thing. You'd be doing this again tomorrow. So you survived your first battle, bravo. No decapitation, trampling, or accidental javelin catching. You probably felt invincible, which was adorable, because in the Legion, the real danger started after the fighting stopped. Let's begin with wounds. Get stabbed? Congratulations! You now experienced Roman field medicine, strong wine, prayers, and a guy named Lucius who once saw a bone and declared himself a surgeon. If you were lucky, your wound was shallow and your medic sober. If not, well, enjoy your new nickname, Lefty. Then there were diseases, not background threats, but enthusiastic participants. Dysentery spread through camp like gossip. Soon half your cohort was sprinting to latrines while the other half groaned in puddles of regret. Sanitation technically existed. Communal sponges doubled as biological weapons, and no one understood germs. They were too busy dying from them. Malaria, typhoid, infected blisters, trench foot, and whatever was growing on your tentmate's leg, all part of the experience. No sick days either. You marched until you dropped, then they'd talk. Parasites? Worms, lice, fleas. Your body wasn't a temple so much as a bustling ecosystem. If you got a fever or your arm turned an interesting color, you went to the valetudinarium, the Legion's hospital. Sounds nice? It wasn't. Mostly beds, moaning, and a guy heating up knives. If you didn't improve in 3 days, you weren't ill. You were dead weight, quietly relocated to the ditch while the next recruit wondered about that rash. Now let's say you overslept, dropped your spear, or, God forbid, blinked during formation. What happened? Pain. The Legion ran on discipline like taverns ran on wine and bad decisions. Every rule had a punishment. Every punishment had humiliation, and your centurion lived for it. First offense. Maybe a public beating with the vitus, that vine staff that left welts shaped like your dignity. Get caught sleeping on guard duty? That wasn't a slap on the wrist, that was execution. Actual capital punishment. Because if you were tired enough to nap on watch, you were tired enough to not mind being stabbed. But the crown jewel? Decimation. If your cohort retreated without orders, your unit got divided into groups of 10. Each group drew lots. The unlucky one got beaten to death by the other 9. Yes, your friends would club you to death because you ran slightly faster than the guy beside you. Even minor offenses got creative. Drop your helmet? Run laps. Insult your centurion? Dig a ditch. Fill it. Then dig it again until you passed out or he got bored. Complain? Enjoy latrine duty so fast your sandals wouldn't touch the ground. Why so harsh? Simple. Romans believed fear built unity. A legion feared its centurion more than the enemy. Somehow this worked. Welcome to the Castra, your new home. Like summer camp, but with more calluses and existential dread. Your tent, made of leather and false hope, housed 8 grown men with swords, blisters, and incompatible sleep schedules. The smell alone could be weaponized. Your bed? The ground, cuddling your shield like a sad Roman teddy bear. Rain? Your tent leaked because nothing says imperial glory like waking up soaked and spooning a guy named Aeneas. Food. A thrilling cycle of barley porridge, hardtack, and more barley porridge, seasoned with whatever dirt or shame blew in that day. Occasionally, if the gods smiled or a chicken wandered into camp, you got meat. Usually, it was chewy bread and sour wine that doubled as mouthwash and disinfectant. Meal breaks weren't relaxing. You cooked it yourself over a communal fire using a pot that hadn't been cleaned since Augustus ruled. Burn the food? Joke's on you. It tasted better that way. Daily chores? Thrilling. Cleaning weapons, repairing roads, digging ditches, hauling supplies. Basically everything except relaxing. The best part? You did this after marching all day and training until your legs quit. Evenings were for gear maintenance, weapon cleaning, and trying not to cry visibly. Maybe some dice games that ended in fistfights, or a bard playing the world's saddest flute. Then the centurion's evening inspection, where he judged your armor like it insulted his mother. Some grew fond of it. The rhythm of misery, the camaraderie of shared suffering, the laughter at the new guy who bathed with cold vinegar. You spent weeks believing you were the sword of civilization, the fist of order, the sandaled enforcer of history's right side. Surprise, the enemy didn't get the memo. To them, you weren't a hero. You were an invading tax collector with a pointy stick. You showed up uninvited, burned fields, insulted gods, and demanded tribute while calling it the greater good. Somehow they weren't thrilled. Take the Gauls. To Romans, they were mustachioed barbarians with questionable hygiene. To Gauls, you were that obnoxious empire that kept liberating them into slavery. The Germanic tribes? No fancy roads or togas, just axes and an unshakable belief you needed to die. They saw your shiny armor and formations and responded with bare pelts, primal screaming, and close-range violence that made veterans reconsider their career choices. The Parthians fought on horseback, shooting arrows while galloping away, a move Romans considered cowardly because it worked. Your enemies didn't fight by rules. They ambushed supply wagons, stabbed you while you peed behind trees, and sharpened grudges alongside weapons. Get captured? Best not to think about it. You might be paraded as a trophy, forced to dig your own grave, or sacrificed to a god with too many antlers. So while you saw savages, they saw monsters, marching symbols of oppression, arrogance, and really annoying marching songs. Turns out history depends on who's writing it. After 25 years of marching, bleeding, and miraculously not dying, which apparently counted as an achievement, you finally reached retirement, or as the Romans called it. Look who hasn't been stabbed yet. Let's talk about the golden dream first, land. Rome promised veterans a nice little farm on the frontier. Picture it, peaceful dirt, olive trees, complaining about kids these days, and not getting impaled by javelins. Sounds perfect, right? Except this land was usually in hostile territory, surrounded by locals who remembered you burning down their uncle's village. So your golden years might include surprise ambushes. Think of it as retirement with combat cardio. Then there was the pension, the premia, a generous payout assuming Rome had the money and your commander remembered to file the paperwork before dying in a swamp. If not, you might get paid in IOUs, pottery shards, or a firm handshake with a reminder that glory is its own reward. Some veterans took their skills private, becoming hired muscle for corrupt governors. Others became trainers, beating new recruits with the same tender care they'd received. Many just drifted, broken bodies, too many scars, and night terrors of war drums that never quite faded. You could spot a retired legionary by the limp, the 1,000-yard stare, and the instinct to dig defensive trenches around his vegetable garden. Socially, mixed bag. Some places respected you as a living relic of Roman might. Others saw you as that cranky old guy muttering about formation discipline at the market. But hey, you were alive. That already put you ahead of most. You'd survived battles, diseases, centurions, and history's most judgmental sandals. Now you got to yell at grandchildren in Latin and maybe whittle a wooden gladius. Not bad for a walking shovel with anxiety. Life in the Legion came with certainty, mostly about death. Facing mortality daily bred either deep spirituality or spectacular paranoia. The average soldier worshipped enough gods to fill an Olympic stadium. Jupiter for thunder, Mars for war, Fortuna to hopefully prevent your javelin from bouncing off a helmet and impaling your best friend again. But Roman religion wasn't just worship, it was cosmic micromanagement. You didn't just go into battle, you sacrificed an animal first, something fluffy and doomed. The priest would inspect its liver. Yep, that's a good-looking spleen. Meant the gods were probably on your side. Probably. Legionaries had personal guardian spirits too. The genius of the legion, a sort of divine mascot living in a tiny shrine that judged your life choices. Superstition filled the gaps. Never put your left sandal on first. Never sharpen your sword on a bad omen day. If a raven croaked while you oiled your armor, just dig your own grave and label it reserved. Dreams were serious business. Fire in your dreams meant triumph. Rats meant betrayal. Dream of your centurion smiling? You were already dead and just hadn't realized it. Omens. Birds flying wrong. Thunder at awkward times. Someone sneezing 3 times. All signs Jupiter was bored and about to spice up your life. Did any of this guarantee protection? No, but it made dying slightly less terrifying if you believed Mars personally approved of your face getting axed off. For some, faith brought courage. For others, it was just another reason to constantly look over your shoulder. Because in the Roman legion, even the divine kept the kill count. You didn't sign up for glory. You signed up because a recruiter promised bread, coins, and the vague chance of not starving. But once in, oh buddy, you became a cog in Rome's glory machine. Survive a battle, don't expect medals or commemorative tunics. You got a speech shouted from a makeshift platform by some general who only got dirt on his sandals when he tripped in his bathhouse. He'd bellow about valor and Rome's eternal greatness while you tried not to vomit from blood loss. Your role? Cheer, nod, and definitely don't mention your buddy got his head replaced by a spear 5 minutes in. Back in Rome, different story. There you were a hero, as long as someone else was telling it. Politicians used your suffering as backdrop for triumphs. Mosaics got commissioned, arches built, statues sculpted, rarely with your name. Maybe you'd be mentioned in a scroll if you did something legendary, like single-handedly holding a bridge or dying poetically. More likely you'd be lumped into the brave legionaries who made the ultimate sacrifice, right between a battle horse and a supply crate. Meanwhile, senators sipped wine and bragged about their cousin's cousin who totally commanded your unit. That's how you became legend, as a footnote in someone else's family tree. The public adored victory stories narrated by poets who'd never seen battle. To them, your 3-day mud fight was a stirring tale of Roman might, with the dysentery, screaming, and belt-eating desperation conveniently edited out. So yes, you earned glory, not for yourself, but for the Republic, the Empire, the rich guy whose name would be carved in stone while yours faded by lunchtime. Still, there was something noble in it. A tragic immortality where you died a number, but Rome lived on. Venice in the mid-13th century wasn't for the unambitious. Its canals buzzed with traders' chatter, coin clinks, and foreign spices from ports unknown. A republic built on commerce, and Marco Polo, born 1254, slipped into its merchant class like a duck into water. Except this duck was destined to cross deserts. His father Niccolo and Uncle Maffio weren't your average merchants. These were adventurers in silk robes, men who'd already vanished eastward before Marco could speak. When they returned in 1269, the boy had grown into a curious teen with questions that could sink a ship. Meeting his father again, Marco wasn't handed toys. He was handed destiny wrapped in camel skin and strange maps. Niccolo and Maffio had been to Kublai Khan's court and were determined to return, this time bringing their wide-eyed son. Imagine, 17 years old, barely left your city, and suddenly told, pack your things. We're walking to China. No boat, no safety net. Just horses, heat, and hope. Odd choice. Marco wasn't a diplomat or interpreter, didn't even speak Mongolian. But he had something you can't teach, unshakable curiosity and a knack for observing everything. So in 1271, Marco walked out of Venice heading east on a 15,000-mile journey that would take nearly 25 years. Not soldiers, not priests, just merchants with a death wish or visionaries, depending who you ask. Venice gave Marco trade. The road would give him the world. The journey began with a papal blessing, literally. Before plunging east, the Polos stopped in Acre for sacred oil and letters from Pope Gregory X to Kublai Khan. Because when heading into Mongol territory, bring gifts, divine endorsement, and paperwork. Then the real travel began. North through Armenia and Persia, lands where deserts stretched like punishment and the sun cooked you in your robes. This wasn't just heat, it was bandit country. If terrain didn't break you, the humans would. Raiders lurked like wolves, eager to lighten your load, starting with your throat. Marco didn't just survive, he absorbed. He collected impressions like a sponge in a bazaar. Fire-worshipping Zoroastrians in Persia, strange drinks, learning to read people who didn't share his language. He was being forged by experience, part merchant, part anthropologist, part survivor. The Silk Road wasn't one road but a tangled web of trails through heat-blasted plains and cities rising from dust like mirages. In Yazd and Balkh, Marco saw architecture fit for wizards, bazaars filled with unimaginable goods. Rhubarb, lapis lazuli, gunpowder, and camels. So many camels, grumbling, farting, perpetually irritated beasts, each more stubborn than the last. Any romantic adventure notions were crushed under desert monotony, camel spit, and dysentery. Still they pressed on, up through the Pamirs, the roof of the world where altitude stole breath and wind howled like curses. The air thinned, Marco grew leaner, but his resilience thickened like calluses. Months became years. By China's borders, Marco was no mere merchant's son. He was fluent in multiple languages, skilled in survival, accustomed to rhythms of a world Europe didn't believe existed. The Venetian boy was becoming the man who'd change how Europe saw the East. By the time Marco reached the Mongol heartland, he was exhausted, sunbaked, and likely smelled like a dead yak. None of that mattered. Ahead in Xanadu stood Kublai Khan's palace. No ordinary court, but a sprawling complex of marble and gold-laced silk tents, guarded by elite warriors, filled with scholars, magicians, elephants, and astronomers. More international airport than palace. Kublai was no ordinary emperor either, grandson of Genghis, ruler of history's largest contiguous empire from Pacific to Black Sea. Yet he welcomed the Polos like old friends. Why? He craved information like dragons crave gold. And Marco had stories. The Khan took to Marco instantly, maybe for his curiosity, maybe how he described Persian customs like reciting poetry. Whatever the reason, Kublai saw potential and gave Marco a court role. Just like that, a Venetian teen became a trusted emissary in the world's most powerful court. Marco didn't admire carpets. The Khan sent him on missions across China and beyond. Yunnan, Sichuan, even Myanmar and Vietnam. He became the empire's eyes and ears, witnessing paper money like economic magic. Grand postal stations with fresh horses every 25 miles, medieval Amazon prime. Cities with millions, clean streets, functioning sanitation, while Europe still tossed chamber pots into alleys. Marco absorbed it all, not just geography but textures, colors, smells, behaviors. The merchant's son had entered the dragon's palace and found not fear but fascination. The longer Marco Polo lingered in Kublai Khan's service, the more the empire revealed its surreal sophistication. This wasn't the barbarian horde Europe whispered about over wine. This was silk-robed civilization with astronomical observatories, functioning bureaucracies, and cities that made Paris look like a soggy village. Let's start with the capital, Canbalak, modern Beijing. A metropolis so vast you could ride through it for half a day and still not reach the palace. Wide boulevards, organized markets, public granaries, even neighborhood crime inspectors. Europe still blamed demons for bad harvests. Then there was the food. Marco tasted things beyond Western imagination. Exotic fruits, rich sauces, fermented mare's milk, which he politely tolerated, and suspiciously pasta-like noodles. Historians still argue whether Italians invented pasta after this. Marco just ate, but it wasn't all lavish feasts. He witnessed the Khan's justice system, brutally efficient. Thieves lost noses. Corrupt officials got theatrically executed. The Mongols didn't do second chances, but protected merchants and enforced religious tolerance. Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, Taoist, didn't matter if taxes got paid. Speaking of taxes, Marco marveled at the administration. Provinces had rotating officials to prevent corruption. Paper money backed by gold and enforced by death. Try refusing a yuan and lose more than your wallet. Then there's the Pony Express on steroids. The Mongol postal network with horse stations every 25 miles stocked with supplies. Couriers could cross the empire faster than European kings could send messages across their backyard. Most astonishing was the multiculturalism. The Khan employed Persians, Arabs, Chinese, even Europeans in government. The only qualification? Usefulness. For Marco, this was revelatory. Europe was stuck in religious squabbles and feudalism, while the East prioritized knowledge and efficiency. Kublai himself, calculating, curious, wasn't just a conqueror, but an administrator. To Marco, he became the most powerful man on earth. The Venetian had seen a world his homeland couldn't fathom, and he was just getting started. Marco's role at court was fluid. One day a diplomat negotiating with rebellious vassals. Next day galloping to Yunnan to inspect mineral wealth. Sometimes a spy in local garb noting who was loyal. How did a foreign teenager gain such trust? Two superpowers, observation and storytelling. He could describe a village's customs, food, atmosphere so vividly, it was like the Khan visited himself. Marco didn't collect facts, he collected atmospheres. How a man carried himself, how markets smelled at midday, how silk rustled when a governor lied. The Khan valued this. Marco wasn't some stiff bureaucrat, but a living scroll, part anthropologist, part court jester, part human GPS. It helped that he charmed rooms. Despite being foreign, he'd mastered enough Persian and Mongolian to communicate. When words failed, his dramatic flair took over, mimicking accents, describing monsters so vividly you'd swear they were real, recounting legends that made warriors lean closer. His travels weren't without danger. In India, he nearly died of fever. Mountain tribes attacked his caravan. He got stabbed once, non-fatally. Imprisoned for 2 weeks over a misunderstanding, dining on chicken heads and goat milk until someone recognized his Mongol badge. Still he endured, seeing jewel-armored elephants, Hindu firewalkers, Tibetan sky burials that turned his stomach, southern lands so hot eggs cooked in sand. Through it all, Marco remained unshaken. Every encounter, near-death experience, marvel, he banked them mentally like a scribe writing in invisible ink. These stories of paper money, funeral birds, mountain demons, silk cities would one day rattle Europe's foundations. By the early 1290s, Marco had spent nearly 2 decades serving the Khan, crossing mountains, deserts, jungles, surviving fevers, intrigues, and arrows aimed too close for comfort. But Venice was calling him home like an echo he couldn't ignore. Problem? Kublai didn't want to let him go. The aging, increasingly paranoid Khan had grown attached. The Polos weren't just useful, but inner circle trusted in ways few were. Letting them leave felt like surrendering favorite chess pieces before endgame. Fate intervened. A Persian prince needed escort for his Mongol bride Kokachin by sea from China to Persia, the land route being too dangerous. Naturally, the Khan tapped the Polos. This wasn't some awkward family vacation, but a logistical nightmare. 14 ships, 600 passengers, diplomats, priests, warriors, cooks, one terrified princess with dynastic pressure on her shoulders. They sailed from Chuanzhou in 1292 into slow-motion disaster. Storms tore the fleet apart. Pirates circled. Disease struck hard, killing most passengers and crew. Only 24 survived, including the Polos and princess, limping into Hormuz nearly 2 years later, looking more haunted than heroic. Mission accomplished? Technically, the princess was delivered. The prince grateful. The Khan would die in 1294, never seeing Marco again. Now nothing stopped the Polos going home. They returned not in triumph, but confusion. Venice was at war with Genoa. Nobody recognized them. Their clothes foreign, speech strange, pockets full of gems sewn into hems. Locals whispered they were imposters or madmen. After 24 years of wonder, Marco was home, and Europe had no idea what to do with him. You'd think after surviving deserts, Mongol politics, disease-ridden voyages, and enough palace drama for 10 lifetimes, Marco would retire peacefully, sell some silk, grow a nice Venetian beard. But no, he got himself jailed. Shortly after returning, Venice fought Genoa, its favorite hobby. Marco, ever loyal, joined the battle because what better re-entry than immediately getting captured in a naval skirmish? In 1298, Genoa threw him in prison where fate handed him a quill, an audience, and immortality. His cellmate? Rusticolo of Pisa, a romance writer who'd spent his career penning chivalric tales about knights and dragons, basically a medieval fantasy novelist. Marco started describing paper money, million-person cities, flaming mountains, cannibals, black stones that burned hotter than wood. Rusticello's jaw hit the floor. He grabbed ink and parchment. Say that again. Slower. Thus began Il Milione, the travels of Marco Polo. Part travelogue, part fever dream, so bizarre Europeans couldn't decide if it was fact, fiction, or hallucination. Readers encountered wonders. Paper currency, coal, porcelain, snow leopards, medicinal rhubarb, Buddhist temples, Siberian shamans, gold-walled palaces. Marco described Hangzhou and Kanbalik with such richness, it made European capitals resemble haystacks with delusions of grandeur. Not all facts were accurate. Unicorns, probably rhinos. Dog-faced men, likely tribal tattoos. Giant birds carrying elephants, poetic license. Was it honest? Maybe. Did it matter? No. The book spread like wildfire, translated, copied, devoured by scholars and dreamers. Most contemporaries thought Marco was lying or insane. But one Genoese sailor decades later would read it, close the book, and mutter, "What if?" That sailor? Christopher Columbus. Marco's jailhouse stories had just altered the Western world's trajectory. Marco was painfully ahead of his time. So much so that even after returning, even after his book circulated, people called him a fraud. He spoke of cities dwarfing Christendoms, black stones that burned, black-skinned men, golden palaces, people who bathed daily. That last one alone made medieval Europeans clutch their pearls. Scholars debated if he'd really traveled beyond Persia. He rarely mentioned the Great Wall. His tea and chopstick descriptions were suspiciously vague. They missed the point. Marco wasn't writing a Lonely Planet guide, but recording what dazzled him, from memory, in a Genoese cell. Considering he had no camera or notebook, we can cut him slack. Despite skepticism, Marco became famous. The kind where people knew his name, but treated him like that uncle who swears he saw a mermaid. Entertaining? Sure, but don't quote him at dinner. The book endured. Copied, translated, entering royal libraries, planting seeds in minds beginning to grasp the world's vastness. As Marco aged, he returned to merchant life. Married, had 3 daughters, operated quietly from Venice. But he never recanted. On his deathbed in 1324, priests urging him to confess his lies, Marco reportedly said, "I have not told half of what I saw." Not defiance, truth. How do you describe the world's immensity to people who've never left their street? You don't. You write it down and hope the future listens. Marco died quietly in 1324, but his story was just beginning to travel. In following centuries, the travels of Marco Polo became among history's most influential books. Not just a bestseller, but a seed planted in geography, imagination, and ambition. Sailors, scholars, emperors clutched it like treasure maps. Cartographers pored over his words, translating tales into maps bearing names like Cathay, China, and Zipangu, Japan. Some accurate, some wildly off. Then there's that Genoese sailor. Columbus didn't just read the travels, he studied it, annotated it, slept with it. When he sailed west in 1492, he carried Marco's words literally, believing he'd reached the east Marco described. Instead, he stumbled upon a new world. Ironically, Marco's imagination helped discover a continent he never predicted. Legacy isn't built on accuracy alone, but impact. Marco introduced Europe to religions, cultures, and peoples existing beyond church sermons, revealing a world smarter, richer, more complicated than imagined. He shattered the medieval belief that civilization stopped at the Alps. Yes, later historians picked apart his omissions and embellishments. Why no Great Wall mention? Why mythical beasts? But none erased that he inspired generations to explore, question, dream. Marco wasn't just a road traveler, but a thought traveler. And in history's grand arc, that might be the greatest journey of all. To truly understand ancient Rome, forget the marble statues and Senate speeches. Start with the street vendors. The real pulse of the empire didn't thrum through the forum, but sizzled in clay pots along smoky alleyways where the poor lined up with empty stomachs and a handful of coins. Most Romans lived in cramped fire traps called insulae, 5 stories of wooden misery with no plumbing, no insulation, and critically, no kitchens. Cooking at home was a fire hazard and frankly a luxury for the wealthy. For everyone else, meals came from outside. Enter the thermopolium, Rome's answer to fast food. These open-fronted stalls featured massive stone counters with sunken clay pots, dolia, keeping mystery meats and stews bubbling. Meat stews, lentils, beans, salted fish, boiled cabbage, sausages swimming in garum. If it could be boiled, fried, or fermented, you'd find it here. The smell alone could knock a barbarian off his feet. Vendors shouted over each other, hawking specialties to soldiers, laborers, and anyone smart enough not to attempt home cooking. A couple of bronze coins bought you a hearty meal, maybe a chickpea pancake, fried dormouse. Yes, really, or flatbread smeared with honey and herbs. Then there was garum. Oh, glorious garum, the fish sauce holding the empire together. Made by fermenting fish guts in the sun until they liquefied into brown sludge. This was Rome's ketchup, sriracha, and MSG rolled into one. Poured on everything from porridge to fruit, it came in grades from premium clear liquamen for fancy banquets to murky alleyway dregs. The elite garum from Pompeii or Hispania could cost more than wine, while street vendors used it to mask questionable meat freshness. Some even drank diluted garum as a hangover cure, which tells you everything about Roman stomachs and nothing about good decisions. Thermopolia weren't just about food. They were gossip hubs, gambling dens, and social equalizers. Gladiators might eat beside merchants, freedmen beside thieves. Your social rank dictated where you dined formally, but here, hunger was the great democratizer. To understand real Roman life, you don't need scrolls or statues. You need the sizzle of stew, the scrape of a ladle, the curse of a cook chasing a fig-thieving kid. This was the empire's rumbling belly, always hungry, never silent. Archaeologists have uncovered over 150 thermopolia in Pompeii alone. Their dolia is still stained with ancient food residues. Most were built into apartment block street fronts. You'd walk up, lean on the counter, and point at whatever looked least likely to kill you. The owner, usually a family-run operation, would scoop your meal into a bowl with a warning not to ask ingredients. The menu? Utterly Roman. Pulse, a grain porridge dressed with anything from honey to leftover meat. Lentil stews, boiled cabbage, grilled fish, and for the brave, those garum-soaked sausages. Lucky days brought fried cheese or pastries sweetened with dates and sesame. For working-class Romans, thermopolia were convenience store, cafeteria, and social network rolled into one. You didn't just go to eat. You went for news, tax complaints, gladiator fight arguments, and maybe a bribe or two. Roman graffiti often mentions these spots by name, sometimes praising the food, often insulting the owners. "I banged the barmaid at this dive," reads one Pompeian scrawl. Yelp reviews haven't changed much. Drinks? Mulsum, cheap wine-honey mix, was common, along with pasca, watered-down vinegar wine, popular with soldiers and masochists. The elite sneered at thermopolia as dirty and low-class, which didn't stop them sneaking off to poorer districts after dark for roasted chickpeas or garum straight from the source. Writers like Martial and Juvenal mocked this hypocrisy, nobles shaming the poor for eating food they secretly craved. Even slaves, officially at society's bottom, sometimes tasted the same sausages and flatbreads as free citizens. In that greasy moment, class lines blurred on the tongue. Festivals turned Thermopolia into pure chaos. During Saturnalia, Rome's December blowout where slaves could dine with masters, vendors roasted whole pigs outdoors, handed out fried pastries, and sold spiced wine so potent it could melt lead. The streets reeked of meat, bread, and poor life choices. Lupercalia, the February fertility festival, featured blood sausages, fatty meats, and enough wine to make the wolf-impersonating runners seem sane. Even religious festivals saw temple sacrifices redistributed as sacred barbecue, meat stewed, fried, or shoved into bread by opportunistic vendors. But Roman street food had a dark side. No health inspectors meant vendors watered down wine, chalked flour, and used spoiled meat spiced beyond recognition. One common trick? Soaking rotten fish in garum to refresh it. Prices were rigged via crooked scales and undersized ladles. Graffiti from Pompeii documents these scams by name. Ancient Yelp reviews with more venom and worse spelling. Some vendors bribed officials for prime locations, leading to stall disputes that occasionally erupted into full riots. One recorded brawl started over olive fritters. Spoons flew, stew spilled, someone lost a tooth. Then there were the poisons, actual intentional poisonings. Rome had no shortage of enemies, and food was an easy weapon. Several senators allegedly met their end via wine laced with venom or figs dusted with powdered glass. The wealthy employed food tasters. The poor rolled the dice with every bite. Add in rats, roaches, and street-side sewage, and it's amazing anyone survived lunch. Hygiene wasn't just poor, it was mythological. If you didn't develop an iron gut by age 10, you didn't make it to 15. Yet Romans returned daily because street food was irresistible, a dangerous, delicious dance with destiny. What's a little food poisoning compared to a steaming meatball drowned in garum? Modern parallels abound. That chickpea pancake? Basically farinata, still served in Liguria today. Garum's descendants live on in Worcestershire sauce and Vietnamese fish sauce. The Thermopolium spirit survives in food trucks, kebab stands, and late-night pizza joints where one questionable slice could either be your best idea or worst mistake. Archaeological finds reveal tantalizing details. A Pompeii Thermopolium fresco menu shows prices. 2 asses for wine, 1 for bread, while residue analysis uncovered traces of duck, snails, and beans in cooking pots. Modern chefs have even recreated ancient recipes. Mustachium, mustard seed cookies, libum, cheese bread, and yes, garum, though your neighbors might petition against the smell. Today, Rome still serves dishes that would make a plebeian weep with recognition. Fried artichokes, herb-infused cheeses, oil-drenched flatbreads. The empire fell, the emperors turned to dust, but the flavors survived. Because when you bite into something salty, crispy, and questionably greasy at 2 a.m., you're doing what Romans did 2,000 years ago, eating history one reckless mouthful at a time. In the medieval court's cacophony, between clinking goblets, rustling silks, and the occasional jousting injury, one constant remained: music. But not just any music. If you wanted to set a feast's mood, soothe a restless noble, or smooth over a political beheading's aftermath, you called the minstrels. These weren't background strummers. They were sonic engineers of the medieval world, carrying news, reciting poetry, performing ballads, and composing satire, sometimes while their audience still held knives. Their instruments, lutes, harps, fiddles, bagpipes, if you really wanted to wake the nobility, were tools of persuasion. A well-tuned minstrel could transform a dull court dinner into lyrical warfare. The medieval court ran on drama and performance, and minstrels fueled both. They immortalized deeds, real or exaggerated. If a knight slew a dragon or merely fell off his horse trying, they'd craft a song. Truth didn't matter, rhyme did. Minstrels weren't just musicians, but verbal magicians. With sharp tongues and clever wordplay, they spun tales of doomed lovers, legendary warriors, and betrayals so tragic they'd make a stone weep. They could wring laughter from surly lords or tears from battle-hardened knights. all while reading the room like a psychic. Offend the wrong noble? Suddenly you're performing in the stables. Their social standing was fluid. Some were beloved court fixtures. Others treated as glorified jesters expected to sing for supper, literally. But all knew one truth. In the royal court, music had to be more than pretty. It had to be useful. Political flattery, coded gossip, veiled warnings, all disguised in verse. Their power was immense because before history was written, it was sung. Noble deeds, petty rivalries, courtly romances, all passed minstrel to minstrel like living folklore. If a lord wanted legacy, he didn't need a monument, he needed a catchy tune. Minstrels didn't just play music, they played memory itself. When a minstrel entered court, they brought a portable orchestra. The lute reigned supreme, its pear-shaped body and gentle twang perfect for tales of tragic love and heroism. Want to impress a lady or rewrite your battlefield blunder as valor? You needed a lutenist. The harp, not the gilded Renaissance type, but a wooden workhorse, could be delicate or dramatic, ideal for ceremonial entrances or when a lord wanted to look pensive without thinking. Drums and tambourines signaled excitement, battle prep or drunken dancing when dignity had left the hall. The viol, a proto-fiddle with a nasal whine, excelled at sorrowful laments, perfect for firelit tales of betrayal. Flutes and recorders handled lively dances, while bagpipes, beloved in Celtic regions, loathed everywhere else, could clear a room or rally a clan. But the minstrel's greatest instrument? Their voice, trained not in conservatories but in roaring markets and echoing halls. These voices cut through noise, wine-slurred heckles, and the occasional flying chicken bone. They mimicked accents, chanted Latin, crooned French, or spat satire in local dialects, all while plucking strings or keeping drum rhythm. Each performance balanced music and message. A wrong note board, a wrong lyric could lose heads, sometimes literally. Instruments weren't just wood and string, they were survival tools. To the untrained eye, minstrels were courtly background noise. In truth, they were emotional regulators, PR agents, political commentators, and memory keepers rolled into one. In a world ruled by performance, the minstrel played the room like a grand instrument, and woe to those who missed a cue. Not all medieval musicians were created equal. While modern ears might lump them together as minstrels, the courts drew sharp distinctions between performers. Where you came from and what you sang determined whether you dined at the high table or with the hunting dogs. In the echoing halls of power, the difference between a troubadour and a jongleur could mean silk cushions or a bed of straw. At the pinnacle stood the troubadours, Occitania's poet-composers who wrote and performed their own lyrical masterpieces in the long DOC. These weren't starving artists, but often nobility themselves, knights, lords, even the occasional duke who traded his sword for a lute. Their songs revolved around fin amour, courtly love, unattainable duchesses, spiritual torment, and the exquisite agony of forbidden desire. Imagine medieval singer-songwriters with a flair for dramatic heartbreak and better tailoring. When Bertrand de Born sang, "I love her so much I'd take communion with her gloves," audiences swooned. Troubadours dealt in subtlety and subtext. A skilled one could turn a simple lute tune into a three-act play about class, passion, and social climbing. Their northern counterparts, the trouvères, worked similar magic in Old French, though their themes leaned more martial than marital. Less sighing over married ladies, more crusade anthems and heroic ballads where heads rolled literally rather than figuratively. Both groups wrote for aristocratic patrons who appreciated layered meanings. A song about a knight's devotion might secretly critique a count's policies, if you knew how to listen. Then came the jongleur, the workhorses of medieval entertainment. These versatile performers juggled literally, played multiple instruments, sang borrowed songs, told dirty jokes, recited gossip, and sometimes trained animals, all while dodging rotten vegetables. If the troubadour was your candlelit wine bar crooner, the jongleur was the guy doing card tricks in the tavern backroom, while pickpockets worked the crowd. Jongleur traveled constantly, court to castle, market to monastery. living on tips and leftovers. While they lacked troubadour prestige, they possessed street smarts and crowd-reading skills that could shame modern comedians. Need a duke mocked without him realizing? The jongler's your man. Despite these differences, troubadours and jongler often collaborated, one composing, the other performing, one praising a countess's eyes, the other roasting her husband's bald spot. The system worked because medieval courts demanded variety. After 6 hours of troubadour laments about unrequited love, even the most romantic duchess needed a juggling monkey. Medieval love songs weren't your basic "roses are red" ditties. Troubadours crafted intricate poetic forms. The alba, dawn song of secret lovers parting. The pastorelle, nobleman attempting to seduce a shepherdess, usually failing. The servante, political or moral commentary disguised as romance. The best could imply a countess's infidelity while technically singing about spring flowers. This linguistic gymnastics wasn't just artistic, it was survival. When Bernard de Ventadorn sang, "My joy depends on another's will," everyone knew he meant his patron's wife, but plausible deniability kept his head attached. Satirical songs were medieval roast battles. Jongleurs specialized in these, veiled insults about lords who overate, priests who misbehaved, and knights whose armor outshone their intellects. Targets who objected were met with wide-eyed innocence. My lord jests. This song's about a fictional fool. Wink. Some jongler traveled with bodyguards. Then there were the scandal songs, court TMZ set to music. A well-placed verse could hint at a bishop's gambling habit or a baron's peasant mistress without stating facts outright. These spread like wildfire, morphing with each retelling. What began as gentle teasing in Aquitaine might become lethal gossip by the time it reached Flanders. Jongler traded these like currency, knowing a juicy song about the French king's limp could buy free lodging for months. Religious establishments hated minstrels for precisely this reason, their ability to make heresy hummable. When the Goliards, wandering scholar minstrels, set satirical Latin poems to drinking tunes, the church nearly imploded. Their Carmina Burana collection mixes pious hymns with lyrics like "The abbot eats while we fast" and odes to taverns. That these often shared parchment with sacred texts tells you everything about medieval musical whiplash. Instrumentation defined status almost as much as lyrics. Troubadours favored the lute or harp, instruments requiring years of study. Jongler mastered the crowd pleasers, bagpipes for outdoor fairs, hurdy-gurdies for drone effects, portable percussion for dancing. A noble household might keep a harpist on retainer, but hire jongler for festivals when they needed someone to make vegetable jokes during the 7th hour of a banquet. Women found rare creative outlets here. The Trobarets, female troubadours like the Countess of Dia, composed songs challenging gender norms. Her famous "I must sing of what I'd rather keep silent" openly declares desire for a knight she can't have. Other noble women patronized minstrels or learned instruments themselves, the medieval equivalent of starting a record label when barred from the stage. For all their differences, minstrels shared one unshakable rule: know your audience. A crusade ballad might kill at a Templar gathering, but earn scowls at a Parisian salon. The same duke who laughed at his cousin's expense might order tongues cut for similar impertinence. The smartest minstrels kept mental ledgers, which lords had thin skin, which ladies appreciated double entendres, which bishops secretly enjoyed drinking songs. This cultural cartography was as vital as musical skill. Modern echoes abound. The troubadour-jongler dynamic lives on in singer-songwriters versus arena performers or composers versus cover bands. That viral tweet threading political critique through pop lyrics? Pure medieval servant. And when a stand-up comic tests material in small clubs before hitting late-night TV, that's the jongler's road-tested wisdom. Always know which jokes play better in castles versus taverns. What united all minstrels was the understanding that music wasn't just entertainment. It was power, currency, and sometimes armor. A well-timed song could soothe a tyrant's rage or spark a rebellion. Notes and words carried equal weight, and the best performers knew how to balance them like knives in a juggling act. One slip could be fatal, but the risk made the art breathe. In an age before printing presses or social media, minstrels were living libraries, news networks, and cultural commentators rolled into one. They shaped how people understood their world, whether through a troubadour's complex allegory or a jongler's crude but effective parody. That a 21st century political cartoon or protest song can trace its lineage directly to a 12th century satirical ballad speaks to the enduring human need to speak truth, or at least gossip, to power, preferably with a catchy chorus. The church's eventual co-option of minstrels into religious drama, like the Feast of Fools where lowly clerks parroted bishops, proves how even institutions that feared them recognized their influence. By the Renaissance, the troubadour tradition would evolve into the madrigal, jongler skills into commedia dell'arte, but the DNA remained. Use art to reflect society back at itself, with all its beauty and absurdity intact. Perhaps the most telling medieval minstrel story comes from the chronicler Gerald of Wales, who recounts a Welsh king executing a bard for satirizing him, only to be haunted by the dead man's songs until granting the bard's family reparations. The lesson? You can kill the musician, but the music outlives tyrants. Every protest singer from Woody Guthrie to Pussy Riot walks that same tightrope and owes something to those first daring souls who set subversion to melody. Banquets were where minstrels earned their silver, not just through music, but by orchestrating the entire evening's emotional arc like medieval DJs reading a room's vibe. Imagine a great hall, torches flickering on stone walls, nobles reclining on cushioned benches, tables groaning under roasted swans and honeyed dormice, wine flowing like the Tiber in flood season. Then, a lute's first plucked note cuts through the chatter. The feast hushes. The real performance begins. Minstrels understood banquet psychology instinctively. Their sets weren't random but carefully paced, a lively estampie, dance tune, to open, loosening limbs and tongues after formal greetings. Then a chanson de geste, epic tales of Charlemagne or Arthur, to stir martial pride during the meat courses when bloodlust ran high. As wine softened the crowd, they'd shift to romantic reverties about springtime or covertly risque pastorelles, so the shepherd said to the nun. Finally, when ale had dissolved decorum, raucous drinking songs encouraged nobles to dance on tables, preferably without toppling into the soup. This wasn't background music, but emotional alchemy. A skilled minstrel could defuse tensions between rival lords by having them harmonize on a crusade refrain, or soothe a queen's wrath with a Celtic harp lament so mournful it made her forget why she was angry. Their repertoire functioned as medieval mood lighting, golden tones for celebration, minor keys for intrigue, rhythms speeding or slowing hearts to the host's agenda. Royal courts leveraged this power deliberately. When hosting foreign dignitaries, minstrels performed songs referencing the guest's homeland, a Breton harp piece for a French envoy, a Moorish-inspired tune for Spanish visitors. These weren't casual choices, but sonic diplomacy, the medieval equivalent of playing a national anthem. Get it right, and treaties were signed. Get it wrong? Suddenly your vintage was accidentally spilled down your doublet. Minstrels also served as banquet pace setters. The length of a ballad could dictate how long guests remained seated between courses. A quick-tempoed saltarello might rush servants clearing plates, while a drawn-out plain song gave chefs panic attacks in the kitchen. Smart hosts bribed minstrels to extend musical interludes when the roast peacock was still half raw. The best performers mastered the art of lyrical improvisation, tailoring verses to flatter specific nobles. Spotting the Duke of Burgundy arriving late, suddenly the song's hero just happened to have burgundy-colored plumes. Noticing the Countess blushing at a young knight, cue a metaphor about roses and youthful valor. This real-time creativity was as prized as technical skill. A minstrel who could spin a lord's mediocre jousting performance into Homeric heroics earned extra gold, and likely a permanent position. But banquet entertainment wasn't just minstrels. It was variety shows blending music, acrobatics, and outright weirdness. Troops might include jongler juggling flaming torches, occasionally setting tapestries ablaze, Cantors reciting Arthurian episodes with different voices for each night. Dancers performing the Morisco, Moorish-inspired steps with bells on their ankles. Animal acts featuring bears, wrestling, or monkeys in doublets stealing purses. Specialty performers like fire eaters or contortionists from the Holy Land. The more exotic the act, the higher the host's perceived status. Chronicles describe a French duke importing Saracen tumblers just to one-up his neighbor's boring harpist. Food and music intertwined symbolically. Subtleties, those elaborate sugar sculptures between courses, often mirrored musical themes. A song about the Swan Knight might precede an edible swan replica with gilded wings. This multisensory storytelling immersed guests in narrative. You didn't just hear about Camelot, you tasted it, quite literally when the sugar castle was devoured. Minstrels also functioned as living menus. In an era before printed programs, their songs announced upcoming dishes, a hunting ballad preceding venison, a sea shanty before fish courses. The cleverest wove dietary advice into lyrics, like this surviving scrap. Eat not the eel in month of May / lest your guts betray you come light of day. Medieval public health bops, essentially. Religious feasts followed different rhythms. Christmas saw sacred dramas with minstrels playing angelic harmonies on harps, while Easter's somber tones demanded muted viels. The Feast of Fools, that wild December event where lower clergy parroted their superiors, featured minstrels leading backwards hymns and donkey processions, walking the line between heresy and hilarity. But the true test of a minstrel's banquet prowess? Handling disasters. A spilled wine cup on a duchess's lap demanded an immediate humorous ballad about clumsy knights. A political faux pas required diverting everyone's attention with a sudden drum solo. When King John of England famously choked on a peach pit at a 1216 feast, the minstrels reportedly launched into such a vigorous stampede that half the court didn't notice until the royal face matched his scarlet robes. Historical footnote: they stopped playing when he started turning blue. Modern parallels abound. That wedding DJ reading the room to shift from grandpa's slow dance to the electric slide? Pure minstrel instinct. Corporate event planners timing speeches to dessert service? Medieval banquet pacing. Even TED Talk musical interludes owe something to minstrels understanding how sound resets attention spans. What made great minstrels irreplaceable wasn't just talent, but emotional intelligence. The ability to sense when lords needed rallying, when ladies wanted flirtation, when tensions required diffusing. In a single evening, they might be background ambience, featured performer, therapist, and crisis manager. No wonder the best commanded salaries exceeding many nights' incomes. They weren't just entertainers, but psychological first responders armed with lutes. Their legacy lingers in every curated playlist, every speaker's warm-up act, every diplomatic dinner's carefully chosen background music. Because humans haven't fundamentally changed, we still use sound to shape social spaces, to comfort or excite, to make memories stick. The minstrels just knew it first and sang it best. Beyond the feasting halls and courts, medieval music pulsed through every stratum of society, from cobblestone streets to cloistered monasteries, each locale demanding its own soundtrack. This was no monolithic culture, but a sonic tapestry woven from peasant work chants, monastic plainsong, and marketplace cacophony, all coexisting in imperfect harmony. To walk through a medieval town was to navigate overlapping soundscapes where sacred and profane collided daily. Start with the fields, agriculture's brutal rhythm section. Harvest songs synchronize scythe swings across wheat fields, their call and response structure keeping exhausted laborers from collapsing. A good harvest leader could wring extra productivity from crews by varying tempos, slow dirges for dawn's back-breaking stooping, accelerating to lively refrains when the afternoon sun demanded distraction from blistered palms. These weren't pretty melodies but functional tools, their lyrics crammed with planting advice, weather lore, and enough sexual innuendo to make a bishop blush. Sample verse: sow your seed deep, lad/else the crop grows weak, lad. Village squares hosted their own musical microcosms. Market days brought fiddlers sawing out dance tunes while fishwives bawled prices in rhythmic cadences. Blacksmiths hammered anvils in time like one-man percussion sections. Even the town crier's announcements carried melodic flourishes, important proclamations often delivered in sing-song tones to aid memorization. Children's street games came with chants passed down through generations, some so ancient they preserved long-dead linguistic quirks. The whole village became an instrument. It sounds layered like medieval surround sound. Then there were the pilgrims, walking Spotify playlists of devotion. Roadside shrines echoed with their Latin hymns, while tavern stops inevitably devolved into raucous drinking songs about saintly miracles, or the lack thereof. The Canterbury Tales captures this perfectly, clerics debating theology one minute, singing off-color ballads the next. Pilgrimage routes became cultural arteries, transmitting musical styles across Europe. A Breton sailor's shanty might surface in a Bavarian tavern months later, mutated by countless retellings. Sacred spaces weren't immune to this sonic invasion. While Gregorian chant dominated monasteries, common folk smuggled secular tunes into worship. Christmas especially saw churches overrun with farces, rowdy plays where congregants brayed like donkeys during the Nativity or hurled nuts at Herod. Clergy complained endlessly about parishioners humming dance tunes during Mass, or, worse, reworking hymns into love songs. One 14th century bishop lamented that his flock knew more tavern ditties than psalms. The church fought back with liturgical innovation. Polyphony, multiple melodic lines sung simultaneously, emerged as high art to distinguish sacred music from peasant fare. Soon cathedrals echoed with intricate motets where tenors sang Latin scriptures while altos wove French love lyrics above them. This musical multitasking delighted educated elites, but left peasants baffled. The message was clear. Some harmonies required theological training to appreciate, and by extension, some souls were more musical than others. Yet folk traditions persisted underground. Sanctified instruments like organs and bells coexisted with outlawed panpipes and bagpipes, deemed too pagan. Clandestine carols smuggled fertility rite remnants into Marian devotion, singing of very bright maidens, with winks toward older goddesses. Even the Dies Irae chant borrowed its ominous melody from a Slavic folk tune about werewolves. The medieval soundscape was nothing if not a remix culture. Urban centers bred their own musical hybrids. Craft guilds maintained signature tunes, bakers' processional drums, weavers' rhythmic loom songs. In London, the Waits, municipal wind players, performed from towers at dawn and dusk, their shawms and sackbuts slicing through city noise. Night watchmen sang the hours, their melodies serving as acoustic sundials for illiterate citizens. Every trade had its auditory branding. The fishmonger's distinctive cry, the tinker's clanging progress through alleys. Domestic spaces held quieter soundscapes. Noble women embroidered to harp accompaniments, their fingers moving in time to Celtic airs. Nurseries echoed with lullabies preserving ancient protective charms against fairies and witches. Even castle kitchens had their rhythms, pestles pounding spices in time. Scullery made singing work songs as they plucked geese. Music wasn't entertainment here, but a tool for endurance, transforming drudgery into something bearable. Seasonal cycles dictated sonic shifts. May Day brought flute-led processions and flower crown dances. Midsummer's bonfires rang with fertility chants and the rhythmic stomping of sun wheels. Harvest home festivals featured corn dollies paraded to rustic oboes, while winter's advent clamped down with somber antiphons, until Christmas unleashed its sanctioned chaos of mummers' plays and wassailing. War produced its own brutal music. Archers marched to fife and drum cadences calculating steps per mile. Siege engines creaked in rhythmic groans before releasing their payloads. Before Agincourt, English longbowmen reportedly sang St. George's Song, so loudly the French mistook their numbers. Battlefields themselves became grotesque orchestras, the shriek of broadswords, the wet thunk of poleaxes, the arrhythmic gasps of the dying. Through all this ran minstrels, the medieval equivalent of radio towers transmitting culture. A traveling fiddler might pick up a crusader's tune in Marseille, blend it with a Moorish rhythm in Barcelona, and spit out some Franco-Arabic hybrid by the time he reached Paris. Their repertoires became living archives, preserving melodies that would otherwise vanish when plague or warfare silenced their creators. Modern remnants linger everywhere. That sea shanty TikTok trend? Direct descendants of wailing work songs. Gospel call and response. Harvest chant structure with salvation lyrics. Even the ubiquitous Happy Birthday melody began as a 19th century kindergarten tune, proof that folk music constantly reinvents itself while retaining ancient DNA. What made medieval soundscapes extraordinary was their democracy. Unlike today's segmented playlists, workout mixes, dinner jazz, medieval life demanded music that could accompany plowing, praying, and partying, sometimes simultaneously. A single villager might chant psalms at dawn, ball drinking songs at noon, and croon lullabies at dusk, switching modes as easily as we toggle apps. This sonic flexibility reflected a worldview where sacred and secular weren't opposites, but points on a spectrum. The same throat that praised God in the morning might recount scandalous fabliaux by nightfall. No cognitive dissonance required. Medieval people understood that life's rhythm required both dirges and jigs, often in the same day. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson buried in these sound waves. Music wasn't just art, but infrastructure, as vital as roads or mills for maintaining society's heartbeat. From the chanting monk to the alehouse fiddler, every player kept the grand medieval playlist spinning, each note a stitch in the cultural fabric that still, faintly, echoes today. As the medieval era waned, minstrels didn't vanish, they evolved. The troubadour's intricate poetry birthed Renaissance madrigals, jongleurs' slapstick morphed into commedia dell'arte, and wandering fiddlers became courtly violinists. But their essence, the alchemy of words, music, and social commentary, never died. It just found new disguises in an ever-changing world. The printing press should have killed them. Why hire a minstrel when you could buy sheet music? Yet live music persisted because notes on a page couldn't improvise when a duke got drunk and demanded a song about his falcon's hunting prowess right now. The smartest minstrels adapted. Some became music printers themselves, peddling broadside ballads about recent scandals, medieval tabloids set to recycled tunes. Others marketed themselves as authentic folk relics, leaning into the romanticized past nobles suddenly craved. The Reformation reshaped sacred soundscapes. Protestant reformers, suspicious of Latin polyphony, championed congregational hymns, simple enough for farmers to sing while plowing. Martin Luther himself wrote a mighty fortress to a tavern tune, proving even heresy needed a catchy beat. Catholic Counter-Reformation composers responded with even grander masses, their 60-voice choirs drowning out Protestant simplicity in waves of celestial harmony. Royal courts professionalized music. What had been a single multitasking minstrel became entire departments. Chapel masters for sacred music, dance instructors for galliards, instrumental consorts for banquets. The best positions went to composer-performers like Orlando di Lasso, who could write a 4-part motet before breakfast and improvise a lute fantasia after dinner. Yet even these polished professionals kept traces of their rogue ancestors. Lasso's drinking songs were legendary, and few could rival his knack for setting obscene poetry to sacred-sounding counterpoint. Opera emerged as minstrelsy's flashy air. When 16th century Florentines invented opera by setting Greek dramas to song, they were really reviving the minstrel tradition of sung storytelling, just with more togas and less fart jokes. Early operas even kept the minstrel's role as social critic. Monteverdi's L'Orfeo premiered with subversive political allegories that would have made any jongler proud. Folk music went underground, literally. During witch hunts, paganish ballads about the good folk, fairies, were whispered in root cellars. Sea shanties preserved rebel songs and coded nautical metaphors. In the Scottish Highlands, band harp music survived via clandestine ceilidhs, house concerts, where players could be flogged for performing ancestral tunes. This musical resistance birthed preservation movements. By the 1700s, antiquarians like Thomas Percy were scrambling to collect dying folk songs before industrialization erased them. The Enlightenment tried to sanitize minstrelsy. Philosophers deemed folk music primitive compared to mathematically precise concertos. Yet Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, supposedly the pinnacle of refined classicism, still scribbled canon lyrics like Lech Michigan im Arsch. Yes, that means exactly what you think. The spirit of the medieval jester lived on in powdered wigs. Romanticism resurrected the minstrel as myth. Writers like Sir Walter Scott romanticized harp-toting bards spinning national epics. Composers like Berlioz wrote bardic symphonies dripping with faux medieval melancholy. The 19th century's minstrel shows, problematic blackface aside, proved the enduring appeal of musical storytellers, even when the history was fabricated. Modern media democratized the tradition. Radio DJs became the new jongler, curating sonic journeys for unseen audiences. Protest singers like Woody Guthrie updated the troubadour's role as social critic. Hip-hop MCs, pure medieval minstrels, mixing news, boasts, and satire over rhythmic beats. That viral TikTok sea shanty craze? Just millennials rediscovering the communal joy of work songs their ancestors knew by heart. Even video game soundtracks fulfill the minstrel's ancient function. Skyrim's tavern songs immerse players in its world just as a jongler's ballad transported feasting lords to Camelot. Game composers deliberately use medieval-style leitmotifs. A dragon-slaying theme might echo crusade songs, while elf music borrows from Celtic harp tropes centuries old. The minstrel's true legacy isn't in any one art form, but in the human need for stories sung aloud. Podcasters weaving narratives over background music? Minstrels. Buskers blending current events into cover songs? Minstrels. That friend who always has the perfect playlist for road trips? Modern-day minstrel. The tech changes, but the magic remains. The right song at the right moment still can defuse anger, spark courage, or make a room full of strangers feel like comrades. Perhaps the most telling evolution is in our language. Maestro, master, diva, goddess, star. All terms once applied to minstrels now describe everyone from conductors to pop idols. The words carry echoes of when music makers were seen as quasi-magical figures, capable of bending emotions with nothing but breath and strings. So next time you hum a tune absent-mindedly, or lose yourself in a favorite album, or feel a song speak to your mood, you're channeling something ancient. That shiver down your spine when harmonies align just right? That's the ghost of 1,000 forgotten minstrels nodding in approval. From smoky medieval halls to digital airwaves, the chain unbroken.